This video is going to have a look at Paul of Tarsus and the dot point that considers his contribution to the development of Christianity. So in looking at this dot point, we are asking ourselves, what did Paul of Tarsus do to help Christianity grow and improve? Just by way of interest, it can be helpful to have a very brief look at Paul's upbringing and how it was significant. Paul grew up in the city of Tarsus, which was part of the Hellenistic world, which meant that he spoke Greek and he had a knowledge of Greek philosophy. Paul inherited his Roman citizenship from his father, which meant that he could move freely within the Roman world. He also came from a high-ranking Jewish family, originating from the tribe of Benjamin. He was a Pharisee, which was the teaching authority of the Jewish faith. He was educated under a rabbi by the name of Gamaliel. He had an excellent education in the Jewish law, which was the Torah. His early career was that of catching Christians and putting them to trial. He was the overseer of the stoning of the first Christian martyr, who was Saint Stephen. Paul was also a tent maker, which meant that he could earn his own living wherever he went. So as part of this dot point, it's important that we do not retell the life story of Paul, but it is very interesting at how these circumstances of his upbringing made him the perfect apostle for the Gentiles. So with these things in mind, we can now start and have a look at the ways in which Paul of Tarsus contributed to the development of Christianity. He had that encounter with the risen Christ on the way to Damascus, and this was a complete about turn for Paul. He became completely committed to the spreading of the Christian faith beyond being simply a sect of Judaism. Paul, because of his conversion experience, became very Christocentric in his belief that it was through Christ, not the Mosaic law, that a person received salvation. Next, looking at how Paul established Christianity as separate to Judaism. Please look at Bible quotes to support your answer, particularly look at the Council of Jerusalem. Paul went on his first journey, and during that journey an issue kept coming up, which was, do these Gentile or non-Jewish converts have to follow Mosaic law before they become a Christian? In particular, does a Gentile have to be circumcised before they become a Christian? So Paul took this concern down to Jerusalem, and here we have the Council of Jerusalem in 49 CE to discuss with other leaders of the early Christian church, such as Peter and St. James. It was decided that no, the Gentiles do not have to be circumcised. So have a look at the findings of that council to work out the other stipulations that new converts to Christianity were asked to follow. It's interesting to note that in Paul's journey, the fact that he was Jewish, he had Roman citizenship, and that he had a Greek background and he spoke Greek, made him the perfect apostle to the Gentiles. He argued that salvation was for everyone, and he challenged the Jewish notion that they were God's chosen people. He was very concerned that there should be no racial division between Jews and Gentiles, women and men, slave nor free. And if you look at Galatians chapter 3, verse 28, there's a beautiful quote there. And most importantly, Paul confirmed that these laws of the Old Testament, those Mosaic laws, those laws from Moses, were fulfilled in Jesus Christ. He fulfilled the law perfectly so that Christians don't have to. What other contributions did Paul of Tarsus make to the development of Christianity? Well, of course, he ensured the spread of Christianity through his 3 missionary journeys. And while on those missionary journeys, he established churches and he appointed elders to ensure those communities, those early Christian communities, kept going. Through his missionary journeys, Paul ensured that Christianity went beyond being a sect of Judaism in Palestine, and it became a religion that reached into the known world. So we've already looked briefly at his first missionary journey, where that situation of Mosaic law came about, which he brought down to the Council of Jerusalem. So here we see his second missionary journey, where he travelled as far west as places such as Corinth, Galatia, Philippi, Ephesus, Thessalonica, and here he established Christian communities who met in house churches. He appointed elders to ensure that the beliefs and the practices continued in those fledgling Christian communities. He made sure that Christianity, regardless of a person's background, was accessible to everyone. And here we see his third missionary journey, again beginning in Antioch, going through his hometown of Tarsus and travelling far west, again visiting those churches that he had already established years prior. And here we have his final journey. He was imprisoned in a place called Caesarea for 2 years. He was taken across the Mediterranean and up to Rome, where he was martyred in the reign of Nero in roughly 63. Paul, very, very importantly, established the written tradition of Christianity. Paul wrote epistles or letters to support and guide those fledgling Christian communities that he established on his 3 missionary journeys. Those letters or epistles make up almost a quarter of the New Testament. It's interesting to note that his education as a Pharisee under Rabbi Gamaliel gave him an excellent scriptural background for writing, speaking, and debating. Due to his knowledge of the Old Testament and the covenant, and holding up a position of high authority, he was able to establish that Jesus of Nazareth was undoubtedly the Messiah. His letters provided direction for how to live a Christian life. They offered guidance in ethics, living in community, how to commemorate the Last Supper, as well as working with each other for the good of the body of Christ, the Christian community. His letters helped consolidate Christian beliefs. He took the teachings of Jesus, he explained them and applied them to new situations that arose in churches. Paul's teachings were fully consistent with Jesus and the other disciples. Important to note too that Paul's letters were written before the Gospels, and his writings actually influenced other Gospel writings, especially that of Luke and John. His letters were accepted as authoritative statements about Christian belief and conduct. The Apostle Peter refers to Paul as his dear brother, who writes with the wisdom that God gave him. Peter also describes Paul's writings as scriptures. The other thing to note is that Paul appointed elders to ensure that the Christian community kept going. And finally, I'd like you to have a think about what Christianity would look like today if Paul did not establish these communities throughout the Mediterranean, and write a paragraph on that.